We're live. 8:59, 9 o'clock in the ring. It's all good. How's everybody doing? Excuse me. We have cool stuff to cover today. I want to talk about plastic gauge, oddly enough. The thumbnail that I have up is, the bottom end of the LS motor. So it's a, crankshaft and rods and, bearings and etc. And so I want to talk a little bit about plastic gauge because there seems to be, it's like with anything, there are two camps here. So you're putting together a motor. I'm putting together a professional motor. I'm a professional race engine builder, blah, 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 blah. And you can only use micrometers and bore gauges and, just, precision instruments. And I agree with that. I think that you're putting together, guys are doing race motors, NASCAR or pro stock, whatever they're doing, they're going to do that. But here's what happens. And this has way more to do with human nature than it does we being myopic individuals. It has way more to do with that than it has to do with reality. And a lot of guys don't understand that because of human nature. So you get guys that are on, two camps. So you get guys that, hey, look, I'm a professional engine builder. We have all the tools, everything that's necessary to measure this. We have precision instruments and we can get it right. That's fine. That works. There's no denying that that's good. But oftentimes you'll get people also that have gone down that road that may or may not be professional engine builders at the highest level of performance or of engine building and precision tolerancing. But, I've learned it this way. And so this is the only way that that my way is 100% correct, and everything else is definitely less than that. And oftentimes, not only is it less than that, it's not, shouldn't be usable. It's terrible. It's a bad idea. It's awful. Nobody should do that. We know, obviously, that that's not the case. Having built motors using both methods, I can tell you that both of the methods work, and by both methods, what I'm talking about is using micrometers and bore gauges and all that stuff and doing it that way, and then also using plastic gauge. Plastic gauge absolutely 100% works. For people that think that it doesn't work or that it shouldn't be used, it's because you don't understand. It's not because you're at a different level and you only do things one way. It's because you're myopic and you don't understand the reality of things. I'll give you an example. So I have land speed record motors that I built that said lots of land speed records in the Honda, in the Suzuki, in the Volkswagen, and in the the Sprint Turbo, and they all were put together with plastic gauge. In fact, I would argue, and we're going to talk about, probably in the next video, we'll talk about checking thrust on a crankshaft. I want to go over that a little bit and talk about what experience does when you're doing that. But it's the same thing with plastic gauge. I put together so many motors and used plastic gauge so much that I got where I could look at the plastic gauge and not even measure it with your little piece of paper there where you're measuring the thicknesses and tell you what it is. Because after you do it and measure it and do it and measure it and do it, measure it and do it, measure it 100 times or 200 or 300 or 500 times, once you do something a lot, you get good at it. And particularly if you challenge yourself, if you go, hey, look, okay, put that on, that squished a little bit more, that's a little tighter, that one's going to be 3/10 tighter or 5/10 tighter, or oh wait, that's not good, that's only 1,000. that's 4,000. It's way beyond where it should be. Basically, it's a go no go kind of thing. And so you get really good at that, and you get to narrow that in. Like you should be able to, when you bolt everything together and take it back apart and look at the indentation of the plastic gauge, and you look at the size of the thickness, basically is what you're looking at, because the thicker that you squish the plastic gauge, the thicker that it is, the tighter the clearance, and then the thinner that it is, obviously the less the clearance. um, when you do that a lot and look at it and then measure it, and then you go, oh yeah, you can immediately go, okay, that's not going to work. That's only 1,000th clearance, and it needs to be 2 or 2.5. That's not going to work. Or I didn't even squish down the plastic gauge, so there's way too much clearance. That's, that's a 10 over thing. That's a 10 over or 10 under crank and a standard bearing, and so that they don't even touch. So that's not going to work. So you immediately get to where you can do that, and as you keep doing it, you get to be where you're better and better, and you can start recognizing smaller and smaller differences. You do it, you check it, you go, okay, that's 2.5, okay, that's 2.0, and then you look at the next one, you're like, you know what? Because you challenge yourself, you go, that's in between those last two. I can just look at that with my little surveyor eyeball and look at that and go, that's in between those two, and then you measure it and you check whether you were right, whether your guess was right or not. And then sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. And pretty soon you get to where you're checking that and you're right every time. So you're like, yeah, that's 2.7, that's 2.9, whatever. And with plastic gauge, you're not looking at whether it's 2.7, and I'm using 2,000ths and then 7/10ths of a thou, 2.7 or 2.8. You're not looking at that because you can't really get really get that precise, because the markings on your on your gauge piece of paper that you're doing, it's not that. But you don't have to be that precise, because a lot of times, even with the micrometer, it's hard to get within 1/10 of a thousandth. It's hard because if you had 3 guys measure it, everybody wouldn't come up with the same thing. So 1/10 is nothing. 5/10 is something. So you need to be within that range. And so if you do let's say you want your rod bearing to be 2.5 thousandths. Okay. If it's 2.4, that's probably still okay. If it's 2.6 or 2.7, it's also still okay. You're not going to get, if you want it to be 2.5 and it's 2.7, and then you put your oil pump in, it's not like it's not going to make any oil pressure. It's not like you would even know that, like, especially if it's just one bearing, you might not even ever be able to measure that. If you made one at 2.5 and one at 2.7 and then put them together that way and then ran the same oil pump on them, you probably wouldn't be able to measure any sort of change in oil pressure from that sort of change in bearing clearance. So you have to have a big change in bearing clearance, and it has to be on all of them, not just one of them, for that to be something. And is that still going to run? Yes. Is it still going to work perfectly? Yes. Or would you ever notice any kind of difference? No, you wouldn't. And so you have to be looking at that. And it's the same thing when you're building these engines. It's just, guys get really, really specific, and that's good. You want an professional engine builder, like when you do the rings, and if you want to set the ring gap at 32 thousandths, then they should all be 32 thousandths. But if one of them is 31, it's not going to do anything. You won't notice anything. There will be no change in power. There'll be no difference. There'll be nothing there. The only thing that's different is that you'll feel differently that you missed it. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. If you're an engine builder, you probably would feel bad. Would you feel bad enough to then go to the shelf if you had some more on the shelf and grab another ring and redo it? Would you do that? So would you? In fact, that would be a good poll. Or would you just run it? And if it was a Le Mans motor, maybe you wouldn't run it, just so that you could tell everybody that they were all the same. They might be more mad that you wasted $100 ring or whatever, but that's always a trade-off. You made a mistake, or you have to pay for it, all of that stuff. But it's interesting that I get, having done this a lot at Westech, that you get a lot of people that just, oh, you can't do that. That's just hack. I'm like, well, of the two of us, one of us has built a lot of record-setting motors, and the other one is just a guy that walked into Westech. And so it's just them not understanding. You can have your own opinion about stuff, and you can want to do it your way, and that's fantastic. And again, I 100% support that, and you want to do that, that's fine. But you should also recognize that there are other ways to get something done. Of course, when we're talking about junkyard motors, I don't measure any of that. We just get it from the junkyard. Sometimes we spray it off so that it doesn't destroy the dyno cell and make everything all dirty, and have Brule when he was there, and have the Westec guys go, Holdner guy again, get those things out of here. Those things are pieces of junk. But you just go and put it on the dyno and run it. And then you see, hey, look, it has oil pressure. It's got compression in all the cylinders. And all the valves are opening and closing. They're doing all the lifty things that they're supposed to be doing. And everything is working great. And so I don't do any of that. I don't check any of that stuff. There are guys that want to get a motor from the wrecking yard and take it all apart and then change all the stuff. I'm like, yeah. If you take that apart, it's going to look terrible inside, because they do, because they're wrecking yard motors. Like that L33 that I have. It looks awful inside. Should be all taken apart and cleaned. And yet, 500 pulls later, it works just fine. So we're going to show up and see what happens. So there are both of those things, is my point. So like with the plastic gauge, yes, plastic gauge works. And not only does it work, I would argue that's a lot faster than doing it this other way with all these tools, especially if you don't have these specialized tools. It's not mandatory that you have those, and that's not the absolute right way to do it. This is a right way too, particularly if you have a lot of experience after you do it a bunch of times. And I would recommend that you test it, that you try it a bunch of times. Plastic gauge is cheap. Just put it in there. I got so that I was so cheap with the plastic gauge, I just keep using smaller and smaller pieces so that I could put it in there and get the gauge reading that I wanted, and then not use up the whole plastic gauge, because I wanted my piece of plastic gauge that I had to work for 10 motors or whatever. I wanted to amortize it, because when you have no money, that's one of the things that you do. But just know that works fine, especially if you've done it a lot and you could throw it in there and get things going. And the nice thing, like when I was doing the Honda stuff, is that we had a bunch of bearings. Now I had a bunch of used bearings, but we had a bunch of them. And with Honda, they give you color-coded bearings that are different thicknesses. You go, okay, this is a red one, this is a pink one, this is a green one, this is a black one, brown, whatever. And then when Honda puts their motors together, you won't see all of the same. There'll be individualized bearings to optimize the bearing clearances. We're talking about production motors in this thing. That's kind of why I give a shout out to Honda stuff, because they're amazing. It's cool that they do that, rather than just throw everything in and go, that's close enough, like I would do. So see what you guys got going on. Got a pull here. Have you ever used plastic gauge when building a motor? We have up on the richardholderperformance.com, we are putting up fuel pumps. So we will have fuel pump and injector combos. So we're going to have the 535 liter per hour pumps, like the Hemi pumps, and then 1,000 cc injectors for you turbo guys. So we'll have those up very shortly. And right now, I think we have 52s and 80s up there. We'll probably replace the 80s with 1000s. We may have the 80s too, because the 1000s are a little bit more money than the 80s are. But if you're going to do a turbo thing, or actually, I would even argue, if you're going to do an NA thing, just put the 1000s in it. Unless you're on the budget and you got to do the 50s, we understand that. And it's just an NA one, and I'm never going to run a turbo on it. That's okay. But just always in the back of your mind, you should be thinking, someday I want to put a turbo on it, and then just get the bigger injectors now, because you're going to have to tune it anyways. And you could tune the 1000s and drive them around without any problem. And that way you have the room to grow. Same thing with the fuel pump. Put that fuel pump in, put those big injectors in, then you're ready for boost, and it's a good deal. So those will be up on sale here pretty quickly. We should have the tools going up. All of this stuff, the injectors and the pump should be on sale this month, and then we should have tools up next month. And then also we're working on the turbos also. So we should have turbos available, but I want to do the testing on them before we do that. So we're going to run probably 5 or 6 turbos, both on Jimmy's NSX on his chassis dyno. And we could do it on the street too, but the chassis dyno will tell us the same thing. And then also on an LS, probably he's got something that's swapped out there because we won't be able to get the LS into my Mustang in time to do this testing. But later on, we'll have that. So that's what we got planned. So we'll have good fuel system upgrades because the 535 pump will support pretty good power. And then with those injectors, you have enough room to run some good boost on some 4.8s and 5.3s and 6.0s stuff. And then we'll run on my car. I'll do that on the engine dyno before we put it in the chassis deck, before we put it in the car. We'll do a bunch of testing with, performance packages that we'll probably offer. So with cylinder heads and the 2 camshafts that we have, and then maybe some sort of turbo wazoo thing, and or certainly with the different turbos that we have, and then these pumps and stuff will go in there, so it'll be good. Shane with the gauge and vanilla with a 9. Plastic gauges, shade tree micrometer. Sean, what's up? Chuck, Tommy, FN57. Vanilla with a 9. So you guys see, somebody got it. It tells you if you're in the right neighborhood. I use it when freshening an engine. Never had an issue. Yeah. Plastic gauge is fantastic for picking which quarters you want. Plastic gauge is fine for street engines. Plastic gauge is also fine for land speed record setting engines. I've only used plastic gauge as a very affordable method to determine clearances, and I've yet to have any failures. I know my sample is much smaller than Richard's, but it works. Yeah, it does. It like I said, it's if you put it on there and measure it, particularly if you did it twice, it's right. It's like any other tool if you use correctly. Wonderful yet terrible. Fun with plastic gauge. Does it work? Yes, but not ideal for all applications. Just most. Staying on 9ers in the garage, like practicing guitar. Practice does make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. All right. Anybody just having trouble with the feed? You got feed problems? I use die grinder and polishing wheel for all gasket surfaces. I've had plenty of people say you can't do that. Those people shouldn't use them. I don't know if I've used a die grinder. Ohio Toll Road, what's up? I just sent a text to Ben out there at the car farm out there in Ohio, which round on both ends says high in the middle. I have an LY6 6-liter comp cam 69 cam. Will it? Are you asking will it be soft on the bottom? Yeah, a little bit. I bet Cosworth doesn't use plastic gauge. I'll bet the people that work at Cosworth have used plastic gauge at one time or another. Do you ever have any trouble reusing head bolts on an LS? No, I haven't in the times that I've reused it, but I don't normally reuse factory head bolts on boosted applications. I almost always put ARP head studs in it. It's one thing I would spend the money on. I don't use the China head bolts or studs on those. So that's one thing I would spend money on, because I know that I'm not going to have a problem with ARP stuff. Not ever. But on the factory bolts, I've reused them many times when doing head tests and stuff. Because on an NA motor, if you can get them to torque to 65 or something, because I don't even do angle torques or anything on those when we're doing head tests. I just torque them. I just torque them to about 65 and put them on there, and they're fine. They seal up. Like plastic gauge for seeing real-time tolerances, even across the journal or even around the journal. Yeah, you can see it at different spots. You can see if there's a change in the thickness of the plastic gauge material once you've compressed it, to see if there's hopefully, like if you took a micrometer and went across the whole journal, that it would be the same everywhere. If it's not, you probably need to address that. I know a few guys that manage to take perfectly running engines, disassemble them, and then they never run again. They started off doing a rebuild. Yeah, and the problem with taking them apart is you're going to see stuff in there that you definitely want to change. And you're going to, like this L33, if somebody took that apart, they'd like be, oh yeah, it needs cam bearings, it needs rod bearings, it needs vane bearings, and yet it's running perfect. I mean, they would take apart a perfectly good running motor. I mean, I would like to clean it all, but just so that stuff doesn't fall down into the oil. But they would take apart a perfectly good running motor and want to change all that. It's got to be rebuilt. I got to resize the rods. No, you don't have to do any of that. It's already working. It runs a 7700 and sounds glorious. But that's what would happen. When you take them apart and you take the heads off, you're like, okay, if I took the heads off, I definitely want to resurface the head. I want to resurface the block. And then, okay, I might as well clean up the head, hot tank them, do a valve job, and then pretty soon it's your $300 or $400 or $500 LS motor from the wrecking yard is now a several $1,000 like full rebuild. And I would argue it's not going to be any better. It's not going to make any more power. Let's see. I'm extremely new to this, building my first engine, not a full build. There are a lot of sources with conflicting information. I trust you more. You don't want my brain. It's full of like silliness. The JY motto is just find one in a wreck vehicle. If it spins, it wins. There you go. I love plastic gauge. What do you think about piston coatings? I think that they work. Thermal coatings and dry film on the side. Are they worth the money? Can you do a comparison video? You won't see anything in any sort of comparison. The skirt coating is going to be more for longevity and possible friction reduction, but more for longevity. A lot of factory motors have coated pistons. And I think it's a good idea. Would I do it if somebody wasn't giving it to me? No. Unless I was building maybe a race motor, then I could do it. Turbo header versus stock manifolds. Do you have a video on this? I got a cheap set of stock manifolds for $20 and figure I'd use them to make a turbo kit. You'll be fine. Are you trying to make pro mod power? If you're trying to make like 1,000 horsepower or less, you just put on the truck manifolds. And actually, I've seen guys make way more than that with truck manifolds. I prefer to use plastic gauge. I just assembled motors after using plastic gauge with 20,000 miles on them. They look fine. Yeah, the plastic gauge doesn't. I mean, if the bearing tolerance is right, they last forever, like they would with. It doesn't matter what the measuring device was. If it's right, it's right. Richard has written multiple books in addition to countless articles. Richard, most don't realize the plastic gauge is temperature sensitive. Your reading could be off if it's 75 degrees or cooler. Are you talking about the temperature of the temperature of the plastic gauge itself, or the temperature of the thing that you're testing it on? Richard, we here at NASCAR use plastic gauge all the time. I have to use it a time or two. I like to use them just to make sure I order the right bearings. Yep. First part about plastic gauge is scraping it off. I 100% agree with that. Because then you worry about scratching the metal that you're taking it off of. So relate this back to oil weight. If I go 2,000ths of bearing clearance, what weight should I use? What motor are you building, and what does your factory manual say, and what weight are you using initially? High in the middle and round on both ends. That's right. I know that you like smaller cams, but I'd like to see a Comp 469 cam tested in a car. We run a Texas Speed cam that is similar and it's very drivable. Maybe my idea of drivability is different. It does make more low. I mean, it does make a 469 cam does make less low speed power than the smaller cams that I like. And if you're building an NA motor and you want to make power, I would run a cam like that. But it doesn't drive as nice as the other cams, particularly if you have an automatic trans. I bet every professional engine builder out there has used plastic gauge at some point, maybe not to finish an engine, but for a quick check. I agree with Richard. ARP, I buy the rod bolts. I don't ever put rod bolts in an LS motor. Never. Not in any stock one. Any aftermarket rod that I would put in there usually has a good rod bolt in it. But I don't ever change rod bolts in a factory rod. I don't want to resize them. The rod bolt never breaks in an LS. When we do these big bang motors, and even running these things to 7,700 RPM, which I would argue is way worse than doing boost on them. But if the rod's going to break, the rod breaks on the beam. It doesn't break down. We don't stretch the rod and break a bolt or anything. So I never do ARP rod bolts, but always ARP head studs. Many AG agricultural tractor diesel engines went through my dad's shop without issues using plastic gauge. Yeah, there's no, I don't have to have anybody tell me whether it works or not. I already know that it does because I've done it a lot. But it does work, and people that are telling you otherwise are the ones that are incorrect. We go 2050 for oil for all the Mercedes builds. BMW guys are using 1060. We don't normally run 2050 in anything. An LS motor is usually a 530, sometimes a 520. But if you, the only way that I would go to a 2050 oil is if I was wanting to increase the oil pressure. So if the LS motor was worn out and the oil pressure was starting to get low, I got no problem putting thicker oil in it. Friend has an LQ4 with a 469 cam rec port truck top end. He dailies it and bracket races it. Seems like a solid combo. He's running that setup for 5 years. Yeah, that I think that combo on the LY6 made like 540, I think. So it did good. Would it be worth milling LY6 heads? Yeah, it will raise the compression and it will make more power. GSXR 1100, we found a new Suzuki main bearing that was crowned. Didn't see it when measuring it, but the plastic gauge highlighted it. That could have been problematic. Seen some used engines with a slight flattened out around journal in the power stroke area of the journal. I'm sure Mike would pick it up too. On real high horsepower stuff, the factory cranks, what they tend to do is bend in the middle. So they kind of do this, and that's an exaggerated view, but that's what's happening. And so a lot of times guys, when they're putting them together with these stock crank, stock block things with really high horsepower, is they put more main bearing clearance in the center journal than they do on the outers. It may not make more power, but I'll sure feel better about its reliability. Okay. By going through the engine. Yeah, if you want to rebuild it and drive it another 350,000 miles, that will work. I've used plastic gauge since the 1970s with my dad. Built 30 engines. Just built a small block Ford that runs great. Yeah, plastic gauge works. Get yourself some plastic razor blades to remove the plastic gauge. Exactly. That's what we need. I've used the Bondo putty, the plastic putty smear things, and that works okay. It doesn't scratch anything. Went from changing a crushed oil pan to a full build. Yeah, 3 mains or 3.5. Remaining 4 were 4.5. 4.5 thousandths? That seems really, really loose. I've never needed more than brake clean on a shop towel. Yeah, that's also the preferred method. India Pakistan rebuilds are fine on a junkyard LS. Clean it, cam bearings, flat valves, rod bearing only if crushes off. For once he's copper, reassemble it. Another $150. Richard, you mentioned rod bolts. I was talking to someone. He's running a 400 small block. He wants to do rod bolts for insurance. Waste of time and money. I don't know what power level he's at or what RPM he's at. A small block Chevy or a small block Ford, I would be more apt to do rod bolts in if I was doing it. But anymore, if you're buying ARP rod bolts and then you have to resize it when you do that, if you're doing that, I think I might just buy rods. I never would do rod bolts on LS or other powder metal rod, only standard Ford rods like 22R Toyotas or 7MGs. I still use cork gaskets and have never had a front or rear intake gasket blowout. On small blocks, you mean, on the China wall stuff? We normally use, I have used the cork ones when when there's a lot of thickness there. Normally we just use silicone on it, mostly because on the dyno, on a small block Ford or small block Chevy, we're changing a cam or whatever. We got to keep taking the intake on and off. So we just use silicone on that. But I have seen those cork ones work. Corky. Built a small block Chevy back in '88. 406. Used a crane cam. Would that engine be able to spool twin GT45s without much lag? No, twin 45s is still going to be fairly laggy. And do you want to make 1500 horsepower? Because if you're not wanting to make 1500 horsepower, then you shouldn't use those turbos. You should use something smaller. Do you know if piston oil squirters can be added on an LS2 block like the LS3 blocks have from the factory? An LS3 has a piston squirter? Where is that at? Plastic gauge is a must-have. Have you ever dipped into engine tuning? I tune all of my stuff on the engine dyno, but only aftermarket ECUs, only a Holley and Fast and MS3 Pro, and then now Haltech as soon as we get that on there. Charlie Brown, I don't know if you're wanting to tune a factory ECU. Then there are places online that you can go to that it can help school you on tuning. Would it hurt anything to leave the plastic gauge on the engine? Probably not. I don't think that there's, I mean, if you left all of it in there, maybe, but I don't think there's enough of it to hurt anything. I think it would just wear off. The reason for growing gap was a bent crank. That's not good. Better replace rod bolts on a 3rd gen Hemi. By the grace of God, I found loose reused rod bolts on a redo. I had to do a truck that I bought. I don't replace rod bolts on a Hemi rod either. I don't put ARPs on those either. If I was building a 400, needed a rod resize, I would buy scat rods instead. I think so too. I just think that the cost difference and then the gain that you get from any cost difference would just be way better. If I was just rebuilding and I was going to run a 5,500 RPM 400 with, you know, iron heads on it and a like an RV cam or whatever and a dual plane intake manifold, I wouldn't do anything to the rods. I'd just put them in. Crush. Not 1,500. It was done at A by 5,500. Yeah, you don't need to. Just tell me what kind of power you want. We'll get you sized with turbos. Single GT45 would be best. Yeah. Yeah, a single GT45 will support 700 horsepower on that motor. Yeah, Charlie Brown, Horsepower Academy, Paul is recommending. Completely stock bottom end, 400, 200cc blueprint heads, thumper roller cam, one of the small ones, single plane intake, I guess 6,200. I agree, just buy rods. Rods are so cheap now that, yeah, I would just do that. What's your favorite ECM for Hondas? I've only ever run Honda on them. I've been there when they've, Ernie and the guy at West Tech was using Chrome. It's a real similar thing. And I think we've run one of the Hondas on the engine dyno. I think Tom, when he was there, I think he made it run on fast also. But the Honda worked good for all the land speed stuff that I did. But all of them can give you the right air fuel and timing. Richard, I ordered a bunch of stuff from your site. Push rods, lifters. Bought a Clay Smith cam from you. Okay, cool. Service and parts are awesome, but man, no stickers. Yeah, we don't have stickers. We're trying to work on a good logo, and then when we get that, we can do stickers. I recommended plastic gauge to a mate, but he also double checked with the micrometer. I'll bet when he double checked it with the micrometer that the plastic gauge was correct. 3/4 race cam, competition orange. All these new rods are powdered forged crack caps. They're different than normal forged rods. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen them be cracked cap. I'm looking to build my first 383. I'm looking at some Skip White kits now. Not a bad price. Yeah, they have good pricing on stuff. I have a set of X rods for small book Chevy. A new set of rods is so cheap it's not worth the cost to redo the old stuff. I agree. It's so inexpensive to get a set of 5, 7, or 6-inch rods, whatever, I don't know, piston you're going to use. But an inexpensive scat or any of these other H-beam or I-beam rods or for small buck Chevy or for LS stuff. Have you ever found an ECM that can do a self-tune for ignition advance? I've never seen an ECU that does that, because it wouldn't know what you want to have for a curve unless it has stuff built in from previous testing that would have engines done. Get with ECU shop from Thailand for Honda ECU. Max octane 6+ is good. Self-tuning timing is not possible for the aftermarket. Yeah, I've not seen that. I also get caught up when the engine is on the stand, knowing I can clean this and file that and put full 360-degree oil bearings on the crank, soften the chambers. Softening the chambers will definitely help if you're doing that. I'm curious as to how you're doing that. I have mixed reviews. Some folks tell me to get an 0411 ECM. Some tell me just to spend the money on a Holly. I've never seen any ECU do auto tune properly. You really need a good dyno tuner. The auto tuning portion of it, or people are calling it auto tune, it's just closed loop. So you're putting in parameters. You have a grid that says, okay, under these conditions, I want this air fuel. And the computer goes, okay, I work and adjust till I get those. You have to know what they should be and what you want. And then the computer adjusts using the O2 sensor in closed loop and gets to those targets. And then those become the new values. And then it has to adjust less the next time and less the next time and less the next time. And finally, it gets to where it has all those values. And that works fine. I don't do that. I don't run motors in closed loop under wide open throttle on the dyno. I always run open loop. And then I put in the values that I want to make the change to get the desired whatever air fuel I want. And quite honestly, having it be 13.1 all the way across on an NA motor does nothing compared to 12.8 or 12.7. Or even 12.7, 13.1, 12.5, 13.0, whatever. Even if you have variations in there and then you trim them all out, guess what happened? Nothing. You just feel better. The dyno said, look, the motor didn't care about that because it didn't care about going from 12.5 to 12.8 to 13. It didn't change the power at all. So it didn't care even if it was jaggedy, relatively jaggedy, because it's on a scale. So if you look at it on a scale from 0 to 20, in air fuel ratio, that's still a flat line. It's when your scale is, this side is, 14 and this side is 12, and you're getting big swings in between there. You're like, that's not a very big scale. Use plastic gauge on my 289 rebuild, still running strong. This is for a 5.3 turbo. Charlie, you can use the factory ECU, go to Matt Happel, go to Sloppy Mechanics, get a free tune that he has to plug into your factory computer for that power level for a turbo and a cam and stuff, and you'll be good to go. Stock bottom end, pistons and rods, complete rotating semi, stroker kit, aftermarket block, it's a slippery slope. Yep. all I wanted to do is change my radiator cap, and then pretty soon it's a complete restoration on the motor, on the whole car. Have you heard of MSD6LS problems going bad? Is there a better affordable solution? What, Ben, what are you asking about? An MSD6LS. What is that? Is it an ignition? Is it an ECU? Is it, what is that? Have you ever found the horsepower limit of a stock 6-liter crank? I haven't ever. I mean, we did 1500 and 1543 and then 1330 foot-pounds, I think, on a stock crank. So I don't know if those were now bent or anything, and they were still running, but I don't know what that limit is. 5 site artist to CAD, anything people with their help. I went to Fiverr and had him do one, and I didn't like it. My cross member won't be in the Schrodinger state today, and I'm drilling new holes. I'm nervous. Well, you'll know about the cat when you do it. You could theoretically have an ECM that could tune timing for peak vacuum, but only in idle or free rev. Yeah. Auto tune can get you started so you can drive it onto the flat blade and get it to the dyno. Most of them can handle knock sensors, but you got to program those. I'm going to put it in a truck that won't mechanically handle traction for a few years, but I'm still going to drive it. Would an aluminum engine block have an advantage over a cast iron block when it comes to clearancing a crankshaft? How much would one engine block distort at the operating temperature than another? On the factory ones, there isn't a difference. We run the same bearing clearance on an aluminum motor that we do on an iron motor, because the factory has done that. They've designed the blocks to be the same, I'm pretty sure. But on aftermarket stuff and on older aluminum blocks, clearances were different on big block Chevys and things, like when they were doing the Reynolds motors, the Reynolds aluminum stuff back when they were doing Can-Ams. They had all kinds of growth differences. I'll be back. Need to reset the PC. Softening the chambers on iron heads. I use a soft brass bristle drill attachment and just soften everything gently. On aluminum, I just use a Scotch ball to delicately. So you're talking about just smoothing the surface, right? Because that softening the chambers is something different to me. But is that what you're talking about? Just polishing them, basically. I do the tops of the pistons. These smooth up nicely as well. MSD6LS spark controller for carbureted LS. So have I heard them have problems with those? We've run them a lot, and I've never had any problems with them. I don't like the earlier ones with pre-programmed timing curves in them, because the timing curves that they put in them and the amount of timing that they put in them are for small block Chevys, and they're not for LSs. They had like 34 and 36 degrees of timing in them, and that's terrible for an LS. They don't want that much timing. But when you can put the timing curve in yourself, that works fine. For most people, stock GM ECU is the best option, but Holley's marketing program is quite good. I wouldn't say that their marketing program is. A Holley ECU does things differently than a factory one does. If you can get what you want with a factory ECU, like I said, go to Matt, and he's got a bunch of tunes that you could put in there. There's lots of guys running around on turbo stuff that have factory ECUs that work just fine. That works good. You can also make that work with a Holley. You can also make it work with a Haltech Rebel. You can also make it work. I don't know that I would pick Fast anymore. Having 2 ECUs to do that is kind of a pain. But AEM, there are lots of different ones. You could use the MS3 Pro or just a Mega Squirt. I've been routinely told that the factory ECM isn't great over 1,000 horsepower. I'm hopefully going to be that at the wheels. What is the limitation? Is it a mass flow thing from the meter or something? Plus, you add 5 pounds of boost as you're porting and polishing. I think you overshot. Looking into a distant box called Megajolt. I haven't ever tried that. Congratulations on 1 million views on the Maximum Junkyard, Ellis. Yeah, I did a thing on that the other day. We're going to do a giveaway for that. To the guy asking about coatings, from what I've seen, snake oil, Mercedes pistons, and cylinder walls have some sort of factory electronic sputter coating. Not sure what Chevy uses. They use graphite on the piston skirts a lot of times. Sorry if I don't reply to everyone recommending things to me. I'm currently working and listening to the chat. It's all good, man. It's all good. It's all good in the hood. Yeah, I think that the guys wanting, because it's like everything else. Okay, what's the best cam? What's the best head? What are the best cylinder heads? What are the best whatever? The same thing with ECUs. What's the best ECU? There isn't one. If you take a Fast and a Holley and a factory one and an MS3 Pro, and you ask it to give you, or you make it give you 12.8 to 1 air fuel, they all do that. They do it in different ways. You have to program it differently, particularly the factory one, but they'll all do that, and it will make the same power. If you give that motor 12.5 to 1 or 12.8 to 1 air fuel, it makes the same power on all of those ECUs. And if you give it the right amount of timing, like 29 degrees of total timing, which they'll all do, you'll make the same amount of power. When people are wanting to do that, it's when people are looking at the different ECUs, it has way more to do with how easy it is for you to work with. And then other things like, do you want traction control? Do you want, boost by gear? Do you want how many different not sources, not programs. How many different channels do you need for data logging or for inputs, or what kind of things are you trying to listen to? Does it have knock sensor things? All of those things would come into play, but none of the ECUs, one of them isn't going to make more power than the other one. They're all going to be able to do that. So you can program it and give it the things that it needs. And then those ancillary things, do you need those things, and which one of those have those? And then also, what is the servicing like? Like, how much help can you get? What is customer service like? How many other people are using it? Do you have access to resources to help you get your stuff up and running? What's your idea of softening the chamber? I'm all ears. Softening the chamber is something that you do to the shape of the quench pad. It's not, making the chamber smooth can help with detonation, but softening the chamber, at least that technical term, has to do with an angle that you put on the quench pad that allows you to run more timing and resist detonation. Link is good. I haven't used Link, I think, but the guys at Westech have. Android OS compared to Haltech, Apple OS. Holley is plug and play. LS stuff if you want aftermarket. Most problems people have with ECM brands are self-inflicted. I agree. That's probably the case. When are you going to do the LS giveaway? Oh, the cam giveaway this weekend. Tomorrow. Let's do it tomorrow. Remember, hit the like button. We want to support Richard. I know. We're 2/3 right now, 97 and 65. Because bearings are round and plastic gauge are only 1 point of reference measurement, they do not measure correctly. You are incorrect in that statement. You can like the thing that you like, and you can say that it doesn't work, but the data shows that it actually does work. I always round the quench pad edge the same. Have you messed with Vortec Max 07 6-liter by chance? Every 6-liter responds the same. So I've run most every variant of a 6-liter. So there's only a few. There's an LQ4 and LQ9. There's Recport headed 6-liters, LS2s, and I've run all of those. So if you have a question about your 6-liter, I'm sure I can answer it. How do you find a balance between unshrouding the valve and not killing the compression? Well, that is a balance, but I would argue that the amount that you're unshrouding the valve initially, like when we did the 706 heads on the, what did we do? I think we unshrouded the valves on the 706 heads, and we got about 15 CFM. So if you wanted to, then you could mill the head to get the CC change, but it wasn't very much. It was only 1 CC, I think. It wasn't very much. How much decking can you do to a small block before intake problems? We don't usually go more than about 30, but you can go more than that. You just have to you just might have to adjust the intake manifold. Stock ECU and a decent boost controller works well for the Bear guys. The Bear guys are nearly all Haltech now. Brian Barnhill has a great podcast about the best ECM wideband knock sensors that everyone should listen to. About the best ECM, unless he's saying that they can all do this, all do different things, then I think we have a pretty good idea. I've got an old fuel-only Mega Squirt programmable EFI kit soldered together with through-hole components made in 2007. It's not an opinion, Richard. As much as you are measuring from only the top with a plastic gauge and on top and bottom with a micrometer, you can put the plastic gauge on either side of that, right? Haltech is another couple thousand for no reason if you don't need data logging and the car isn't upgraded all the time. Shrouding the valves is higher priority. Like Richard said, you can shave the head after you get the compression back. Yeah, you'd have to see what the gain is if you're trying to unshroud the valve. And then you can mill it, but we didn't do that and we still picked up power. You're a top speed guy. Do you remember the mullet Ford GT that had twin turbos? And I believe at some point he had a twin turbo and a supercharged setup on the car. I don't know which one you're talking about. I know the guy that has the standing mile record. He's gone 300 in the Ford GT that's a twin turbo because Mahovitz did the motor for that. So he's done that in the standing mile. There's another guy out there that's I think it's the what the heck is the guy's name? He's gone 300, but they did it in a much longer distance. But Mahovitz did 300 in the standing mile with a twin turbo one. I do 4 positions with plastic gauge. Yep, you can wag and wheel the thing all the way around if you want to. Plastic gauge had its beginning at the English Royal Naval Dockyards of the 50s. You put plastic gauge on either side. Yeah, you can measure it in different positions. It's not. And you know with a micrometer, right, that all you're doing is you're pushing one measurement up against the other one and then measuring that distance or measuring the distance on both sides. Those are the same, that they come out to be the same. 300 miles an hour. Were they solid tires? it's an issue. It's a real issue. They had to deal with a lot of things on that. It's a very, very impressive deal. Power is not the issue there. Like temperature management, traction, all kinds of stuff. Just curious about the rec port heads on it, if they're any good. It's a weird casting number. Yeah, all of the rec port heads from the factory are all the same. I mean, they might be a little bit different, but they're all going to make the same power. So that's essentially an LY6 or an LS3 head. So you're good. The only thing that's different between that and an LS3 head is the valve weight, but that's not really a consideration unless you're worried about really high RPM valve train stability. They could put the lightweight valves in there. $53, $64 heads are good. My G8 GT has them. Dudes even adapt the factories. You have 6 transfer cases of the Nissan Patrols, 4 Grangers. Nice. If I hit 300, those tires are going to be discarded after the run. Yeah, I don't know what, I'd have to ask John what tires they use. We use, at Bonneville, we use front runners, which are the tires that they use on top fuel cars. But I don't know if they would put those on that because they're running on asphalt. Not all plastic gauges alike. I found Hastings squishes better than Seal Power. Doesn't bounce back in thickness. That would be an interesting test, is to try the same plastic gauge or different plastic gauges on the same thing and see if you came out with differences. I've found that even just in bearings, that the bearing clearance is different for certain undersized bearings of different manufacturers. We did that test, and they were different enough that I would be concerned about it. It's easy to say that millions of people have used plastic gauge to rebuild hundreds of millions of engines. I've used it on my Honda CB 750K. I use plastic gauge on my LQ4 and it reads on the loose side the factory tolerances. I only get 20 psi of oil pressure at idle and max out at 50 with a high volume standard pressure pump. I'd say it's close. The touch to use a micrometer is a thing too. Yeah, and that's one of the things I want to go over when I talk about the end play, on the thrust bearing for the cranks, is that when we're doing micrometers, which I've used a lot, is it a tight 2.5 or 2.7? Is it a loose 2.7? Because how much pressure you apply to slide the gauge over the journal. Is that a snug one? Can I get another 0.5 of a thou? You know, is it that? That's what I'm saying. If you get 3 or 4 guys to measure it, even with a mic, you might come up with a little bit different reading. How much fuel is being injected at 300 miles an hour? I don't know. I could get the data on it. Were they different for the measurements for the specific brand match for what they say? I didn't test multiple versions of the same one from one manufacturer, if that's your question. And misreading the scale, that's also a thing. There isn't real art to it. In fact, it took me a really long time to be able to read a micrometer. And I don't know why. I'm not terribly dumb, but I just couldn't grasp all of it. So I had to work with Brule a long time on getting this reading. And what I would do is I would go to a digital dial caliper to make sure that I was in the ballpark, because we don't use the dial caliper for that because that's not precise enough, but just that I was, you know, in the right tense and stuff. Something told me the Bugatti can empty the tank in 5 minutes at top speed, but they never told me the tank size. Yeah, those make a lot of power. Has anyone measured the actual force in pounds on the back of a crank via the clutch and converter? I can tell you that when we do the thrust clearance, we do it differently for a stick than we do for an automatic. Do you think it's worth sending an M90 to like line to line to have it coated? I don't think that is worth the cost. Because I don't think you're, I mean, are you trying to go for a world record M90 like power output thing? Then I would say yes. If you're not, I don't think you're going to see enough from, unless you're trying to max it out. Moats used to offer tuning solutions for GM OBD1 stuff. They went out of business. Yeah, I agree. Everything does have to be learned. We have to learn all of that stuff. Everything that we know, we had to learn. And in most cases, like those things, you learn it from somebody that's done it, that they learned it from somebody that's done it, and it gets passed down. What Mike reads 1 to 5 thousandths. Well, when you're doing it, like when you're doing your bore gauge, you have to set it up so that you can zero it with room on both sides of it, so it can go plus or minus after, away from the zero. And then when you do that, then you could go in and measure your connecting rod bore or your main bore. Why do you set the thrust difference on a stick versus an automatic? We want more on a stick than we do on an automatic. It's usually 4 or 6 thousandths. Like, yeah, if you talk to me nicely, be nice. Can't we all just get along? Mallory fuel regulator with bypass, a good carburetor completely changes the car. You'll think you built it. Mine went from mild to pretty wild, just switching it to carburetor. Oh, okay. Switching it from fuel injection to carburation. I was going to say, just putting a regulator on it shouldn't change the way that the car acts. Factory Yamaha manuals tell you to use plastic gauge for checking clearances. They also list the specs for actual measuring. Yeah. You could have ordered another half bearing to adjust the clearance. We've done that too. We've split bearings. We've done, half on one side and full on the other side. And I still don't understand how that works. It seems like it only work on one side, but Richard, I have a question. What do you think of the dual stage charging? It used to be very common. It feels like it's unknown tech. I don't know what you mean. Do you mean compound turbos or compound turbo blower things? Bore size looks good from here. There you go. It's enough. I had to put a regulator on it because the carburetor didn't want 42 psi. Yeah, that's 42 psi would be too much on a carburetor. They don't like that. Imagine doing your own gearbox specific clearances and later owner goes and changes the gearbox over to the other type. You're very patient answering questions from all directions. Happy to help. We got 1 more minute. What's our poll doing? Have you ever used plastic gauge when building a motor? 81% saying yes. 26 gallons at 250 miles an hour around 12 minutes. YouTube's out. Coffee time. It is morning. This is a good channel. I wish you did more inline 6 stuff. I have more coming. I want to put the RB25 on the dyno. And also I have the L28 and I have a 292 and the Atlas 4200. Those are all inline 6 cylinders I have. I have Barras also, but I don't know if we're going to run those. I think I just want to send those back. Compound turbos, one blowing in the next. It used to be superchargers like World War II planes have a supercharger blowing into the main engine supercharger. I have compound stuff up on the channel. So we have turbos blowing into a blower. We have turbos blowing into turbos, and then turbos blowing into a blower again. So I have run those. I had the Z28 Crossfire twin throttle body. I have that. I still need to test that. God, I got so much stuff to do. Where'd you get the Barras? I have two of them. I have two NA ones that somebody sent me. Plastic gauge versus spending thousands on measuring tools. Aviation superchargers have a clutch on them that you can control the boost. Crossfire 355 rebuilt with Vortex pistons and rings. Turbo would be cool. Yeah, the Crossfire stuff, I'm excited. I really just want to compare it to the tune port to see what the induction system difference is. And on that note, it is time to go. See, I told you we would get people that would say that plastic gauge is bad. 1972 Buick 455, bone stock rebuilt, TA performance headers, performer intake, quadrajet. Any idea on horsepower and torque? I don't know, because I don't know what cam that is, and just totally run them. Maybe we can get you to identify the specific versions you have. I'm thinking that they're green top ones, maybe, or something. Just finished watching the video of you running a carb on the TPI intake. What's the longest runners you've run with a carb besides the Skyram's not a carburetor. I don't know I don't know with a carburetor. I ran a carburetor with, I don't know, all of the spacers that we had stacked together. And that still ran, but that's not runner length though. I will be on tonight. Got a 425 out of a Tornado. Bob Smith, you have your Buick, that Buick 455. I have some aluminum heads for that. It's been good for me building motors, catching machinist faults, and we'll keep using them. Box body open track toy, currently at 331. Keep the EEC4 or go to Holly. I think you can get the, well, I know that you can get the EEC4 to make all the power that setup will make. So you don't need a standalone ECU for that. Would a boosted Skyram provide intercooling? No, because that's a 3D printed thing. First of all, it'd blow itself to smithereens, but I don't think you'd get any charge cooling from that. Tell the engine number, they can look that up. Yeah, I just need to go back and look at the emails that they sent. I can tell you what they are. Please run at least one. Any knowledge on the Big Dog performance camshafts? I haven't ever done any testing with them. I'd like to do something with them. I like to do stuff on their ported stuff. And on that note, it's time to go. I got stuff I got to do. I got another video I got to do. We're doing superchargers. I'll see you all tonight.